Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching BQ Prime. My name is Alex Matthew. The last 4 days have been eventful because we've seen the collapse of, or the largest bank collapse in the US since the 2008 financial crisis. We saw Silicon Valley Bank very suddenly and very quickly shut shop. Now, the regulators and, in fact, the US government have stepped in to calm the nerves, and they've announced, most importantly, a backstop, and they've guaranteed that all of the depositors in two banks, SVB as well as another bank in New York, will be safeguarded. They'll get their money back. But this incident has implications beyond just the immediate risk of loss of money by depositors, who incidentally include a lot of the startups here in India as well. There are wider implications for the startup ecosystem here in India, and we're here to talk about just that. Joining me is Ramesh Bafna, the CFO of CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you so much, Ramesh, for taking the time. Let's start with the most obvious question, which is, what are the major implications for companies based here in India?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for having me. Overall, the weekend has been quite nightmarish for a lot of startups in India and overseas. Right, I'll split the impact into three parts. Right, the first impact is the immediate direct impact. Startups having the capital or the deposits in SVP bank itself. Right, so and anywhere ranging from the 5% of the cash pool they have to about 80-90%. So on the 5%, they still have an ability to absorb and wait it out. But for people who have more 80-90% are quite struggling, and who, thankfully today Monday morning news is kind of a booster for them in terms of the continuity of startup. That's the immediate impact. That's the direct one. The second impact will be on the startups looking to raise funds, especially in the winter time, and if their investors have their funds locked into SVP bank, right, and that is the rollover impact in terms of the next funding rounds. And the third impact, which is consequential impact, is given the VC firms have tighter on the cash, they will be a lot more stricter, harsher, or coming after on the profitability, unit economic, return on capital employed. A lot more of that tightening will happen on those existing startups. Right? So all the three, in terms of the ecosystem impact, is going to happen very soon. On the right-hand side, what we have also heard recently is US government stepping in, ensuring no depositors getting a loss, and they'll make it whole. I think that's a great step. It builds a lot more confidence in the US banking, which otherwise would have collapsed significantly, right? And that's where the news are coming. Now, what we are looking forward to is a lot of friends or startups who have their money are looking forward to getting their money in Nostro accounts or their bank accounts in India or some other bank accounts very soon. Hopefully, when the US opens tonight, some of these transactions will start rolling out.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you mentioned, and I want to break these up and talk about each of the points you raised. The first point, of course, is those that have deposits with SVB, or and have to get money back.
Yeah.
This is a significant learning and a wake-up call for some companies which had significant money parked with a single bank, because one would think that diversification is a key element to pay attention to, and that relates to the survivability of a company in certain cases, right? So do you think that, first of all, in your opinion, did a few companies have large amount of their deposits parked with this one bank? And what does this change in terms of the approach that a company should take?
Absolutely, Alex. Bang on. In terms of risk management, I think it's one of the fundamental rules of any CFO in startup or otherwise, right? In terms of having the right treasury and the governance policy on how they manage cash and their investments, right? And having this also highlights a lot more importance on the CFO's role of ensuring that the risks are mitigated. You never knew that SVP bank will go down, but cannot have all the money in just one singular bank account, right? In terms of diversification, I think a lot more board questions have to be answered for startups which had a concentration of capital at one, And secondly, the learning is clearly on having a very, very tighter or well-defined treasury policy going forward. We know a lot of startups are in various stages, and the first focus is on hitting the PMF, figuring out the customer profile, and running the business on day-to-day basis. But this highlights the importance of having the governance layer in place in terms of their policies and structures. Definitely a big learning uh, for this. Thankfully, it was not a shot in the head, but shot by the ear. So there is a lot more listening which is now going on in the CFO circles, and I think a lot of actions for sure in this week going forward.
That's a good way to describe it. There have been calls back here in India to say that Indian startups should have their accounts here in India. That's not necessarily something that would be a workable solution, would it, Ramesh? Considering that these people, a lot of their funding comes in dollar terms, and therefore they need to have a dollar account. But is there a workaround that is possible?
Yeah, I would say two things. Right? I'll split this into two parts. One is if you can have a US dollar or any other foreign dollar dominated denominated bank account in, let's say, Gift City or something around those lines, it's possible, right? But that has to be clearly articulated, and the ease of doing business has to be understood. Like SVB was purely because of ease of doing business, right? They understood the pain points really well and cater to that customer niche, right? Definitely possible in India, probably in Gift City, if we can figure out what are the pain points of all the startups and then address this to significantly benefit. But converting them into INR, I think it has to be a data-driven approach in terms of US dollar. Uh, Basically, two variables I see is the depreciation variable and the delta interest rates, right? So if we can combine these two, and put a data-driven approach by any CFO or the founder, and then take a call whether you have to transfer to INR or not, and they can do it as per the fund flows required. Right. That is the first element in terms of putting everything together. So it's possible in India in a dollar-denominated bank, and but purely transferring to INR has to be a data-driven call.
Okay. Couple of questions now for the entities that have deposits in SVB, as well as those that don't. The question is, how do you tide over short-term requirement for funds and working capital requirements? One would assume that working capital availability becomes a little tighter right now. So is that crunch going to have operational issues for startups here in India?
It depends on, and I'm sure see a lot of startups keep transferring to INR. This is the requirements anywhere between 3 months to 6 months of working capital or the spends. Typical understanding I have is that a lot of transfer happens to just take care of this 5 to 6 months. So I doubt there will be immediate like next 15 days, 20 days capital not available. But if that's the constraint for any startup, I think there are institutions right now available, right, in terms of providing that working capital support, especially when they have receiver certificate as well. There was one more article I just read today morning was from Wall Street Jeffries saying that there is this they're willing to buy receivable certificate at discounts, right? So it's those are other extremes in terms of if there's no amount of cash available, then that's also a possibility. But I think there's much better news from what I'm hearing, and hopefully by today or tomorrow, a lot more clarity should emerge, and people should get their money in a week's time.
Okay, so that hopefully that window is that short, Ramesh. Now the last point with regard to
If
the
not, right?
ecosystem.
If not, Alex, if it goes
Okay.
beyond 3 6 months, then yes, what you said definitely becomes a real constraint in the startup ecosystem because people may not predict more than 3 months kind of
Yeah.
a fallout, right? So then it hopefully the fintech industry has this opportunity to support the other startup ecosystem
Okay.
at this point in time.
So the third aspect was a much broader aspect, and I think it compounds what is an existing problem, Ramesh, which is that there has been a lull in funding of startups. I think people are much more circumspect in the kind of money that they're spending. So therefore, the question is, with from your perspective as well, and for other leaders of startups here in India, do you then review growth strategy and say, okay, I'm not going to burn as much as I thought in terms of cash. I'm going to be more conservative with my growth approach, considering this ecosystem and considering the scenario?
Yeah, Alex, I think that's been happening with the start of winter. It's been a long winter and it's continuing for so much further, right? So there's no clarity on a date when it's going to reverse, right? So I think a lot of startup and this focus on unit economics, focus on and cash management is at a very all-time high. I think this bank incident is a black swan event, which nobody predicted. It will have a bank run, and within an hour or two, it's going to collapse significantly. I believe having a sound treasury policy, diversification of cash flows in the US or in India or any other country, right? That's extremely important. So definitely a treasury policy is important. But from an hygiene and sustainability perspective, I would recommend as a CFO irrespective and look at sustainability as a main agenda.
Okay, fair point. I think we've touched upon the most important points, and hopefully, like you said, the window to resolve some of these issues for the Indian companies is relatively short, and we can move past this. You can feel the effect of the bullet whizzing past your ear, but it is restricted to that. Thank you so much for taking the time. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.